Broadcast of the regular meeting of the Minneapolis City Council will now begin.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Bender. I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the City Council for July 17th. I'll note that this meeting has remote participation by members of the City Council and staff as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll so that we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Present.
Councilmember Gordon.
Here.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Here.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Here.
Councilmember Schrader.
Here.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Present.
Councilmember Ellison.
Present.
Councilmember Goodman.
Present.
Councilmember Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember Cano.
Here.
Vice President
Here.
Jenkins. Vice President Jenkins. President Bender.
Here.
There are 11 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Colleagues, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins. Vice President Jenkins. Council President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries and the agenda is adopted. Our first item of business is the acceptance of minutes from our regular meeting on June 26th. May I have a motion to adopt those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins. President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries and is adopted. The next item of business is referral petitions, communications, and reports to the proper committees. May I have that motion, please?
So moved. Second.
The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins. President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries and those matters are referred. With that, we'll proceed to the mayor's regular report on the state of our local health emergency under the item of new business. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. I will once again try to be as expeditious as possible, knowing that you've got a long agenda. We've reached the end of another incredibly busy week here in City Hall. The first public hearing on the second phase of our revised 2020 budget is in the books. We've had a chance to hear from the Charter Commission directly on public safety, and Chief Arredondo and I earlier this week announced another series of police reforms, this time focusing on de-escalation and the use of force reporting requirements. The Park Board acted on Wednesday to limit the scope of the refuge resolution and to require permits for further encampments. And we continue to coordinate closely with Superintendent Albangora and county leadership to support residents at the encampment and keeping our focus on both public safety and harm reduction. And of course, we acknowledge and recognize and are trying everything we can to move forward towards longer term solutions in the form of both shelter and housing. And as Minnesota cases continue climbing in the form of COVID-19, our city is regrettably part of that trend. We took aggressive steps early, including when we became the first jurisdiction in the state to enact a mask mandate back in May. And we've continued to work closely with other public health leaders and businesses in the community to ensure we're right-sizing our approach to Minneapolis. There have been 14 emergency regulations to date. I won't go through each one of them individually, but happy to answer any questions there. Moving on to the health by numbers, the total approximate number of completed tests has been 790,497. That's up roughly 250,000 more since we last met. You can check out the Minnesota case information. I'm not going to go through each one of the numbers, but I'm happy to answer any questions there. Hospitalization or total cases requiring hospitalization is 4,495. As of today, there's 254 hospitalized. That's down about 80 since our last meeting. Hospitalization in the ICU as of today is 106. That's down about 60 since our last meeting. In Minneapolis, total positive cases are 5,583, over 1,000 more than when we last met. 762 hospitalized and 214 total needing ICU care, with a total of 4,911 recovered. That's in Minneapolis again. 192 is the total deceased. Again, most of those deaths are coming out of our long-term care facilities. Some of those trends are shifting though. The health department has started using the Harvard Global Health Institute's COVID risk levels dashboard to compare Minneapolis and the state. Based on the latest data, Minneapolis is at a higher risk level than the state. So more than 50% of new cases in Minneapolis continue to be in young adults under 35. White young adults account for more than half of those new cases. This group is experiencing increased exposure in bars, at gatherings of friends and family. And I will note that I believe that the top 15 hotspots in the state are all bars right now, and specifically inside. The factors that take place in bars with close proximity and, at least while drinking, the inability to wear masks, the loud talking, it definitely adds and compounds to the risk of spread. For congregate living facilities, congregate facilities in Minneapolis continue to see new cases among residents, but the numbers have decreased significantly. Residents of these facilities account for only 8% of confirmed cases. However, they account for 71% of the deaths. The health department is conducting over 50 case investigations and contact follow-ups for individuals diagnosed with COVID-19 per day. 86% of all cases reported in Minneapolis have been interviewed. 9% are lost to follow up. 2% refused the interview, and 3% represent new cases not yet interviewed, or cases in long-term care facilities which are investigated by the state health department. Moving on to personal protective equipment, health department continues to receive and respond to requests for masks and hand sanitizer. And this past week, they distributed 1,030 cloth masks and 70 bottles of hand sanitizer. In terms of businesses, we are receiving complaints about customers not wearing masks inside of businesses. So to help increase compliance, business owners have been requested new signage, which clearly stating the city requires masks in indoor public spaces. Health inspectors are continuing a second sweep of 24 bars in downtown, uptown, and Dinkytown on July 16th and July 17th. Those represent where we've seen a majority of the complaints. Inspectors are reiterating COVID-19 safety messages and providing guidance. As for procurement, As of July 15, 2020, there has been 5 million. There has been about $5 million spent. The total increased roughly by 8,500 and can be attributed to amendments to the existing GAP fund housing programs. And as I've stated previously, this is not the total spend related to COVID-19. The total spend is in the tens of millions of dollars. In the last week, 6 staff were reassigned from the Minneapolis Convention Center to help the clerk's office for election support. And to date, there have been 102 reassignments across the enterprise. For public safety, violent crime is up 13.6% year to date, and property crimes are up about 4.3% year to date. In year to date, 2020 has had a much higher shooting victim total. And it's been the highest in the last 5 years with 256 victims. The next closest was 2016 with 161. That's up about 71% compared to this time in 2019. The bulk of shooting victims have been concentrated in the 3rd and 4th precincts. The increase in shooting victims is occurring in cities right now across the country, and there's no one significant cause, but rather it's likely due to a perfect storm of factors that are contributing to the increase. The impacts of COVID-19, increased stress due to job loss, economic downturn, closure of gathering places and activities, civil unrest and uprisings across the country at the most recent killings of Black people, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, among others. Here's what we're doing in Minneapolis to respond to some of the increases in gun violence. First, violence prevention initiatives continue to provide service for victims, clients, and their families through GVI, Project Life, and Next Step hospital-based intervention. Meetings have been held in the most impacted areas of the city to coordinate groups that have been providing violence prevention services to community with the goal of alignment and increased collaboration. Continued technical assistance and strategizing with national partners for violence prevention and intervention. Of course, continued collaboration with our community groups and neighborhoods, and the U.S. Attorney's Office Twin Cities Violent Crime Task Force was established last week, and this task force brings together additional federal and state resources to assist local law enforcement to investigate, arrest, and prosecute individuals that are responsible for gun violence in our communities. I can provide more information regarding that task force, but I'm going to skip now to fire. Just don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions on those topics. The fire department continues to collect cloth mask donations for residents in need as part of the city's Mask Up Monday campaign. And this week, a resident donated 4,000 masks at Fire Station 8, which is pretty cool. MFD crews continue to respond to medical emergencies and strive to protect its members and the community in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on to homelessness. As I mentioned earlier, the Park Board acted on a Wednesday to limit the scope of the refuge resolution and to require permits for further encampments. Additionally, we have received requests for assistance directly to the city and to our Minneapolis Police Department. So we're going to continue to work with our county and state and park colleagues to identify short and medium-term options to resolve this situation. Notably, on July 10th, the city and county issued a $14 million RFP utilizing federal ESG grant and CARES funding. The city and county will be accepting proposals for 4 specific areas, and for each will prioritize applicants who are able to demonstrate how their proposal will improve the housing stability of households at risk of COVID-19 served by their program. And a number of the different initiatives include emergency shelter. There's 3 different shelter solutions that we're working on right now, including Exodus, including culturally specific shelter, which again we hope to have up later this year in the fall, as well as a women's specific shelter, which I believe could be up as early as February 2021. We've also got street outreach, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention as well. Beginning on August 3rd, the city and county will evaluate proposals and will work to get the money out the door as quickly as possible. Moving on to state and federal activity. On Friday, July 10th, Governor Walz issued a proclamation calling the legislature back to St. Paul on Monday, July 13th. He began by extending the COVID-19 peacetime emergency by 30 days to help the state continue to respond to the many implications of dealing with the pandemic. In the House, there were many critical issues that were left on the table during the regular and first special session, including a bonding bill, public safety reform, economic relief for businesses impacted by the civil unrest, in addition to a tax bill. On Tuesday this week, the House Ways and Means Committee passed HF1, which includes a range of public safety, police reforms, and accountability provisions. Also on Tuesday in Ways and Means, the committee passed a $1.8 billion bill that is an agreement between House and Senate leadership. The bill contains $21.8 million in projects for the city of Minneapolis, $55 million for BRT, and $100 million in housing infrastructure bonds. I'll note that there is an additional bill looking for $25 million on top of that $100 million in HIB funds that could go specifically to homelessness shelters. So lastly, the House took up a resolution to end the governor's emergency powers, but the resolution failed, 70 to 63. In the Senate, the Senate gavelled in on Monday and took up a resolution to end the governor's emergency powers, and the resolution passed. The Senate then passed 3 small bills and adjourned until a future date. Last week, Senate Majority Leader McConnell signaled the strong possibility of an additional coronavirus aid package by outlining the priorities of the Senate GOP, and details are still coming in. On Friday, FEMA denied the state's request, which we contributed to, for $16 million to assist in economic recovery post-civil unrest. And the city has not yet received a determination for a disaster declaration from the Small Business Administration. I'll note that requests for aid from FEMA have been granted in the past following unrest, even during Republican administrations. A good example being in the 90s, following the unrest regarding Rodney King. And aid was received in LA, in fact, quite a bit of it. Gap funding package. Community prevention partners, Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and the city and county staff continue to work through the list to complete the full verification and approval process for each applicant. As of Wednesday, July 15th, 497 applicants have been approved, totaling $708,000 in emergency assistance payments. As reported, the last time we met, the small business forgivable loans have been fully awarded. A value of $1.5 million over that was awarded to 173 small businesses. As far as recovery, the SBA disaster declaration has been submitted, and if approved, businesses in the area will be eligible for loans primarily for uninsured losses. And we're working with 13 leaders in community, business, and economic development. The Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition co-chairs and core strategy team members are identifying specific solutions, strategies, and tactics that will help, and this work will continue. Thank you so much for your partnership, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have a couple of council members in queue to ask questions. First, we have Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mayor. Just had a question about adult day centers. Just what kind of is the plan for Minneapolis, and get a little more feedback or kind of input about why Minneapolis has not opened their adult day centers yet.
So a couple of pieces. So I'm assuming you mean adult day centers as opposed to congregate care facilities. Just making
Correct.
Sure. Okay. So adult day centers obviously provide a very helpful location for adults to congregate. The issue was that was also a location of a whole lot of the spread. I don't know if Director Musican has some additional information There certainly is the possibility to open, but that opening would come with some significant risks as well.
I think before the director speaks, it'd be helpful to understand what's different in Minneapolis than other municipalities where it has opened, where they have opened.
Well, I don't know that there necessarily is anything different in Minneapolis than in other areas where they have opened. But what I would say is we have seen significant spread in locations where seniors are congregating together, and adult daycares are one significant source. It was also becoming very difficult early on during COVID-19 to enforce both social distancing as well as mask wearing in many of the different adult daycares throughout. In other areas of the state, I mean, at least as far as the respective municipalities go, they did not close down adult daycare centers themselves. Director, do you have anything further on that topic?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader. As the mayor has outlined, we did this early on, and I think really before the state had noticed that this was an area of concern. And since that time, they have developed much more significant guidance, and we have been in dialogue with the mayor's office and the city attorney about whether or not we see sufficient guidance from the state so that we can pull back and allow that to happen. And I think the city attorney has got it on their desk right now.
Yeah. So, council member, we do actually have a draft that has been prepared to rescind. We just want to make sure that we're reviewing all of the data first to make sure that that is in fact the right decision. Again, we have seen the numbers drop, at least as in terms of a percentage in both adult daycares and even congregate care facilities, but they still account for a very significant portion.
No, it's good to have that background. Just with that draft, is there a timeline on that coming forward? Is this something next week, 2 weeks?
I would say it will likely come forward next week if, and this is a significant if the data checks out to show that in fact it's the right decision in terms of health.
Of course, of course. Thank you on that, Coach. I just want to kind of switch topics. I wanted to talk about kind of police reform and some of the, I know there were some council liaisons to those. It would be very helpful to get a report back on how that is going and kind of updates and kind of what we can expect.
I'd be happy to. Councilmember, are you looking for a report now, or are you saying that you'd just like a more thorough rundown of the reforms that have been made? There are.
No, I know that there's. I know you have 2 task force going forward, and there's council liaisons to that. It's just something with that communication would be. It'd be helpful to have that information disseminated a lot more widely, and just if there is kind of an initial, very brief report you have, it'd be helpful to hear that.
Of course. So there are task forces that are meeting now. They are in the process of, one, pulling the information together and then actually coming out with recommendations for policy reforms. In the meantime, there have been policy reforms that have been moved by Chief Arredondo and myself apart from those task forces. The 2 most notable ones thus far have been the shift in the body camera policy, and that policy would prevent officers from reviewing the body camera following a critical incident before they fill out the necessary reports. The second significant one was to sort of bake de-escalation into all forms of their reporting. So now every single time these reports are filled out, we are now supplementing it with what de-escalation tactics were used, why they were used, if there was use of force used, why, and then what was the result. Additionally, there's more reporting requirements. There are things that are now required to be reported that were not before. 1 second, let me get this light back on. So sort of lower level uses of force like an arm bar or even handcuffing is now required to be in the reports where it wasn't before. Additionally, there are more significant uses of force like a takedown or use of some form of chemical agent that is not only required to be reported, it was previously required to be reported, but it also requires notification for a supervisor. So that's a brief rundown of some of the initial policies that have been made. And again, the focus for that second piece was on de-escalation, making sure that that is paramount. It shouldn't be a second thought or a last resort or an afterthought. I mean, it should be the very first piece that is considered.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I mean, I'll just follow up. My question was really on kind of the interaction with the council liaisons and how that information is disseminated among all the council members. So I can follow up later.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, President Bender and Mayor Fry. My question is similarly related, but it's about the gun violence task force and who is on that and how often are they meeting, and are they planning to come forward with recommendations? And if so, is there a timeline?
Council Vice President, by the gun violence task force, are you talking about the initiative through the U.S. Attorney?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I thought you mentioned in your report that that you have initiated a gun violence task force. So I'm not sure if it's the U.S. Attorney's Office or internal task force. So that's my question. So is there a federal agency that has a task force?
I believe what you're referring to is the Twin Cities Violent Crime Task Force, perhaps. And that was established last week. It is the U.S. Attorney's task force. And that's bringing together some additional state and federal resources to assist. I do not know all of the partners that are involved, but it is comprised of federal agents predominantly, and it's analysts from the FBI, it's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, it's firearms and explosives, Secret Service, United States Marshal Service, Drug Administration, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, police officers from both Minneapolis and St. Paul departments, and deputies from Hennepin, Ramsey, Dakota County Sheriff's Office, as well as federal and state prosecutors.
And what's their mission?
I don't have their mission statement on hand, but the main point is to make sure that individuals that are responsible for gun violence are held accountable. So it's investigation, it's arrest, it's prosecution of individuals that are responsible for gun violence in our communities.
Okay, do we have any interaction with this group as the city?
We do. Both Minneapolis and St. Paul police departments are part of this task force. They are involved, yes.
All right, thanks. I have more questions. I guess we can get them offline.
Okay, happy to answer.
Thank you both. I also had a follow-up question on this issue too, which may be for follow-up or now, which is kind of understanding the presence of outside agencies on the street. So certainly having assistance in solving the violent crimes that we're seeing and bringing those numbers up would be great. But I think, obviously we have a lot of policies in place, use of force policies, which are improving, and, direction to our law enforcement related to supporting folks who are undocumented. So can you tell us more about what might be happening on the streets in terms of law enforcement and what the chain of command is and how how all that's working in terms of patrol and that kind of policing?
I can. These are the task force, just to be clear, that I mentioned are not necessarily individuals that are on the street in any form. It's a collaboration put forward by the U.S. Attorney to allow for collaboration between these different entities. It's not a street presence. It's more of an administrative and office presence. Now, we do have assistance on the streets when we need additional personnel. Now, that, as usual, comes in the form of Hennepin County Sheriffs, the Met Council, and Metro Transit Police. Most of the entities that we have recruited to assist us are more in the form of investigations and corrections, so it would not mean that there is an additional officer presence. As far as chain of command, Chief Arredondo is at the helm. So even if additional resources are brought in, they are reporting.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for the mayor from council members? I don't see any. Thank you. Oh, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Mayor. I know you and I spoke yesterday, and I think it would be helpful just to get a bit of an assessment similar to what we discussed about staffing levels right now. I think people are interested in assessing what's the current level of staffing at MPD. I think people are interested in both the quantity and quality of response. So, just what's the sense of how well we're operating? It sounds like we are down. Can you give a little bit of an update on that, and what steps you're taking to sort of change or realign coverage?
Thank you, Madam President, Council Member. Yes, we have seen attrition over the last several weeks. As was noted in the media, that attrition is due to a number of different reasons. Some of it is early retirement, which leads to obviously the requirement of pensions. Some of it has come earlier in the form of a PTSD claim, which would be in the form of a permanent disability claim. And others have just gone on some form of leave. I hesitate to give the precise numbers publicly because I don't want to get them wrong, but yes, we have seen significant numbers lost. I don't want to report any sort of incorrect personnel data. Do we have a representative from MPD that can perhaps explain what the levels look like? I mean, the most recent figure that I heard was 65, but I want to be clear that that's accurate. Do we have a representative from MPD?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Mayor Fry to Councilmember Fletcher. So we're still, when we look at the normal attrition rates that we typically see, and we on average usually see about 45 separations a year. What the mayor is referencing in terms of some of the claims that have come forth in addition to the normal attrition, we're probably the last I've counted, we're probably right at about that 65.
Chief, I believe you cut out. You there? Chief, you there? Council member, we'll get you that information. The figures are definitely far more significant in terms of attrition than they usually are, but I want to make sure I get you the precise figure. Before our Chief Arredondo cut out, it sounds like he was at least confirming the 65 figure, but I want to make sure that's accurate.
Mayor, is that dynamic also happening among first responders generally, like in the fire department as well, or is that just in MPD?
It is also happening in the fire department, but the numbers are definitely higher in MPD.
Okay, thank you.
I just noted that the chief got back on. Chief, we lost you after you said the number 65.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher. Yeah, so right now that number is at 65. As these claims come through, one of the things that will make it difficult to ever really have a real-time running number is that there's the process the employee goes through, which can start out by either going through their own health care provider, whether it's going through an attorney's firm, and then ends up in our HR process. But so I will not typically, as chief, just get a weekly list that, okay, Rondo, here's the 10 names of employees. These can kind of filter in, so it's very difficult to just predict that at the end of this month or at the end of this pay period we'll have 15 members. So it's a really kind of fluid thing. With the normal attritions, we can usually map that out to be about 45 a year. With the PTSD claims, a little bit different to gauge those.
And in addition to the formal claims, in addition to both the formal PTSD claims and the clear resignations or attrition that we're seeing, there's also a level of people who are just going on leave in some form, whether that's taking significant vacation leave or using up the rest of their paid sick. And that also raises a flag as to whether that individual might ultimately leave in some other form, like more completely. And so those wouldn't necessarily be included in the numbers that we just shared.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this update. I am curious, in North Minneapolis, we've just been experiencing a lot of gun violence. And so I'm just curious if you could share what your vision is for public safety, particularly during this time of increased violence, and what is your plan for us to be able to get there. I'm having a lot of constituents ask, and so just wanted to be able to have an open conversation around what that looks like. Thank you.
Well, I will begin, but then I will kick it to our expert in command and Chief Arredondo. We want a comprehensive vision for public safety that includes a variety of different factors. We want to be working hand in hand with community. We want to be working with everything from neighborhood associations to nonprofits to groups like Mad Dads and Mother's Love. I do believe in a community-based approach. Now, for some of these more significant issues that we're seeing, we need to have a more clear tactical approach, and it includes everything from GVI to Next Step, a hospital-based intervention system. And obviously, we also need law enforcement. And right now, our law enforcement are encountering some really difficult scenarios. I'll let maybe the chief talk about what they're seeing on the ground a bit more. But yes, we have seen a significant increase in gun violence and violent crime. That's just what the data shows right now. Chief, would you care to give us more of a rundown?
Yes, Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for your question. So as I go into creating a new MPD in collaboration with our communities, the first pillar to that is we must first do no harm. And what I mean by that, we all are very familiar with the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take, and harm is defined as causing someone or something to be hurt, broken, damaged, or made less valuable. So everything that we do in the Minneapolis Police Department, we first must acknowledge our contribution to both historical and present day trauma, but that principle of do no harm has to provide a guiding light for us from which all of our decisions must flow. And so in order for us to do this work, we're going to need bold, courageous, vulnerable, humble, and unapologetic leaders to help transform the change that we need now. Not yesterday, not last week, but now. And so we need the right people, leaders and influencers, regardless of their rank or position, to help us move this work forward, and they must be supported. Community has to be leading this change of reform, and it has to be community-centered and focused. The data, we must capture and routinely provide clear and measurable information that is focused on transparency and our process. So our organization structure must support our values. So from hiring to discipline and training, those all have to be really consistent with our values. There's a few things that everything from providing mandatory ongoing training for all of our sworn and civilian employees, utilizing some nationally recognized researchers and trainers on the history and dynamics of race and policing, to even establishing a young peoples and chiefs committee where young people are equal partners and their voices and experiences are centered and forged to help with this actionable reform. I've talked about, and certainly the mayor's talked about, stepping away, taking a deliberate pause from the current contract, and making sure that there's language in there that ensures accountability, values community interest, and also provides greater transparency. So that has to be now. The hour for justice is now. And so that is, and I'm giving you a snapshot of the creating a new MPD. We will not be status quo ever again. We will not ever go back to business as usual. And so that's a quick snapshot of that. In terms of Councilmember Cunningham, in terms of what we're doing, and you mentioned the violence, unfortunately, that we are seeing an increase. It really has to be an all hands on deck approach. It's making sure that we're being smarter in terms of how we're approaching the gun violence. Some of the things that the mayor mentioned, offering some of the GVI services, the Office of Violence Prevention. Ms. Sasha has been out there looking at ways we can defuse and de-escalate the ongoing group territorial battles between the highs and lows, some of those things. It's also about supporting Inspector Pulpus, making sure that he's got teams available to be in some of those areas where it's been more problematic. We have contingency plans in place now to reevaluate, relook at about reorganizing some of the units that we've had in place, and if we can make those more effective. That may mean combining units and some of those things. So those are ongoing and will continue to be. But the main goal is to keep our community safe. We have way too many guns on the street. We will eclipse last year's recovery of guns. We had over almost 1,000 last year. We're way above that this year. We see that some of the gunplay that comes out is multiple rounds, large capacity rounds. That's why the federal partners like the ATF and DEA, it's important so that we can start asking the question, how are these guns getting into our communities? Because that is problematic in and of itself, not just getting those responsible, but how are we getting these guns into our communities? And so these are all areas that we will continue to focus on.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may just ask a quick follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember.
Yes, so just to reflect back to make sure that I'm hearing both the mayor and chief. So what we're really looking at is a comprehensive approach that really does incorporate the Office of Violence Prevention, GVI, neighborhood-based groups, as well as neighborhood organizations, while also folding in reforms like mandatory training. I'm curious about, so I read in the paper that that there's a looking to move more officers to patrols. I know that in my ward just last night there was we talked about high capacity gunplay that happens. There was a shooting that happened in my ward. Someone's house was shot in the off. Like police never came, and so I'm just curious about like how are we shifting resources during a time like this in which we do need more folks on patrol. It seemed like that was something that you were looking at doing, but I was just hoping maybe for some clarification. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that we did actually during COVID but now have really ramped up this level, is we looked at this call center where we had placed some of those officers that were not normally assigned to 911 patrol to answer our 911 calls. As the summer has come upon us and we've seen the surge in violence, we are really trying to alleviate the calls that officers that would be normally tied up on those calls. We're having a direct call-in center, and so that will shift more officers back to the precincts to help Inspector Polfus respond to those calls. The one thing about shootings is, and I do this to educate our public, is that those shootings require and take up, as all of you are probably aware on the phone, it's never just usually one squad car at a shooting scene. It requires a lot of resources. If you have multiple victims, if you're trying to secure evidence, if you're cordoning off streets with tape and just trying to maintain it, it can really drain a shift in a precinct. And so, but making sure that all precincts, but certainly as you're referring to the north side or 4th precinct, making sure that we're doing things effectively and smartly to increase those resources. So the call center would be one of those, for example. When our SROs were displaced, those folks are all now reassigned as well to the precinct. So we're continuing to reevaluate that and make sure that we have those officers there to help out the precincts.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I really appreciate you being here, Chief, and I appreciate all that information. I think it's going to be critically important that we focus our attention into these violent areas, and also having this larger task force helping us understand and stop the guns that are coming into our community will be critically important, and I know that the federal agencies are really important to that. I also just wanted to note how kind of reaffirming, I guess it is, to hear you as discussing new visions and status quo being unacceptable and those kinds of things. And I know that it's been popular in the community lately to act like the leadership in the department and even in the mayor's office is miles and miles away from where the council is. And I'm just impressed by how close together that we are and how we all are united, saying that we really do need to make transformational change in the way we do public safety and the way that you're embracing the violence prevention efforts and GVI, which I think has a critical partnership with the department as well as public health professionals as we're approaching it is really hopeful and a hopeful sign, especially as we're entering this year-long conversation about public safety. So after that speech, I just wanted to point and maybe ask a little bit about two things, and I don't really need answers to these now, but there are some opportunities maybe to learn from the past. And so folks may recall a lot of discussion about procedural justice with the last administration, and we had the Department of Justice come in, and we had, I think it was 4 task forces, and we did a whole lot of work. And at some point it would be nice to get a report back, or maybe just something published and made available to people about where did that work land. I actually served on one of the task force. I think it had to do with communication. So where is that work now, and getting some update would be really helpful at some point. I also think we had an opportunity, and I think there probably was some internal work that was done on what could we learn from past police-involved killings, and we certainly have had a string of them, and we've looked at them carefully, and some of them have gone through trials, and so there's a lot of information that we got. And I think as we're kind of poised, if you will, to reinvent public safety in our city, I think it would be important if we could learn from that. So what did we learn from, and what could we learn from past police misconducts, and especially police-involved deaths? And also, what can we carry over from all that work that was done when the Department of Justice was here and there were all those task forces? So I think it would be great to have space and time to look at those two things, maybe at the POGO committee or something. I don't have a staff direction today, but I just wanted to make that request formally here in public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm happy to follow up to schedule something perhaps at our POGO meeting coming up in the future. Are there any other questions related to the mayor's report? I did want to note, Councilmember Goodman and I have been meeting regularly with business owners and community members in Uptown about safety, and it had come to our attention that there was the funds for violence prevention organizations may be running out before the summer is over. So in the interest of time, I'll just note that as a comment and just want to follow up about that as well. Unless anyone wants, unless Mayor or Chief, you want to respond. No, I don't want to drag this out longer than needed. Yeah.
Madam Chair, and I apologize, Councilmember Gordon, your last comments, I got dropped off the line at the last, but I think I heard your last two comments. So one, the report that you're referring to was the Office of Justice Programs, not procedural justice, but the Office of Justice Programs diagnostic assessment that they came in back in 2015 and did. And there were various subcommittees and groups, communications, as you mentioned. I think there was a policy one. That work, unfortunately, and it's appreciative. I know you spent a long time with those groups. It kind of dissolved after there was a change in the national leadership in DC. So the members of that OJP DOJ group kind of left and gone, and certainly my predecessor had left, and so that work kind of just ended. However, there are things that we incorporated from those subcommittees. I don't believe there's kind of like a binding document that has that, but there's certainly things I can brief you on in terms of where some of those things have landed. The second piece that you mentioned about, yes, we absolutely need, and as chief, I have to learn and make sure our department learns from any of these officer-involved killings or shootings or what have you. The one more recently that you're referring to, where there's a little bit of a time delay, is that matter is still being appealed in the district courts. So we are not able to, typically we're able to get all court transcripts to help us in terms of the review, from everything from a training perspective, lessons learned. And I'm referring to the Justine Damon Rusick case. So while those appeals are still in place, we are not given access to all those court transcripts. So that is a very key piece, the officer testimonies and statements. And so the review is been started, but it's not complete because there's some vital testimony and transcript from officers and former officers that we need to get. But it's critically important to learn from those, and so I plan to do that. And also, as much as we can, and I'll certainly work with our city attorney's office to make that lessons learned a more forward-facing document for the public as well.
If I could just follow up, I can appreciate that. I think if there's, so there might be more information we could share from some of the other incidents. And so I'm not sure when the right time is. I can appreciate we can't get all that information about more recent police killings, but Thurman Blevins or Travis Jordan, or there might be other lessons that we could learn. So let's think about when that might be ready, or what level of conversation we could have about it. Because I do think probably a good practice would be to do some in-depth kind of after action reports and look at it kind of like hospitals do mortality reviews whenever anybody dies there. And anyway, that's a thought, and I appreciate that the council president and chair of the POGO committee is interested and willing to bring these up through the committee process, which is really where we should discuss them in detail and not here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from council members? Seeing none, that completes the mayor's report, and I'll direct the clerk to file that report unless there are any objections. Hearing none, I'll ask everyone to make sure that their phones are muted or computers. So the next order of business is reports from our standing committees. So we'll begin with a report from the Business Inspections and Zoning Committee, and that will be given by the Chair, Councilmember Goodman.
Good morning, Council President Bender, members of the City Council. The biz agenda is in front of us. Item number 1 is a Zoning Board of Adjustment appeal for Matthew Wolf of Tuft Law, and we voted to deny the appeal. Item number 2 is an appeal of the zoning administrator by Eric Takashita for a project at 4736 4740 Grand Avenue South. We also voted to deny that appeal. Item number 3 is the liquor license renewals. Item number 4 is a lease with North Star Community Rowing for a portion of the Upper Harbor site. Item 5 is a fairly significant item, and if you aren't on the committee, you might want to take a look at it. It's the funding recommendations for the BTAB program that are going to a whole host of really amazing organizations working on economic recovery. Item number 6 is a temporary lease with the Postal Service at 10 West Lake Street. Item 7 is a comprehensive plan amendment with regard to built form guidance. Item 8 is the rezoning for Lake Street properties and developers for a project at 516 520 West Lake Street and 2949 Garfield Avenue South. With that, there are 8 items in front of us for approval, and I move all 8 items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any discussion on the Biz Committee agenda? I don't see any. I actually have a couple of comments because a lot of this is in Ward 10, and I just wanted to highlight and appreciate some of the items. I did want to really thank the committee members for their support for item 7, which is a comprehensive plan amendment related to a project that Simpson Housing is pursuing to rebuild their current shelter. To operate a very low barrier shelter with 70 beds with attached supportive housing for folks who are coming out of homelessness. So Simpson has really been a leader for a long time in our community in providing low barrier shelter, and this opportunity will give them even more of a chance to create a pathway to housing for the folks that they're serving. So this is one of the many steps, including funding the project. But it's a significant one, and I just wanted to thank folks for that, supporting the comprehensive plan amendment required. Item 6 is the approval of a lease with the post office, and I wanted to just acknowledge that we have heard some interest in using parts of the Kmart building for other uses, including potentially shelter. So that's something I've talked about with our staff. This is using just a portion of the Kmart building, and so there would be space for other uses. The challenges of shelter operations are more related to the operating, finding an operator, and funding operations. So that's, so for example, those 3 shelter projects that we're pursuing in coordination with the county, that's one of the big considerations is finding an operator and finding operating funding, including now the city funding shelter operations in some of the projects. So so certainly the Kmart building could be used in that way temporarily, but there would be a lot of questions to answer on that operations side. And then finally, just wanted to say this item 8 is related to an affordable housing project in Ward 10. Again, just adding to the options that folks need to be able to be stably housed in our community, and every project helps us chip away. So thanks to everyone who worked on this project, including the Whittier Alliance Housing Committee, who's been working to build support for this project. So that's so much in Ward 10 on this one agenda. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that report is adopted. Next is a report from the Policy and Government Oversight Committee given by Vice President Jenkins. Council Vice President, I'll leave it to your discretion if you feel that you want to read each item, or if you think that you'd like to highlight some of the key items. We did have all of them read into the record at the POGO meeting itself, and these are long agendas. So it is up to you, Council Vice President. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President, and I will do my best to consolidate and highlight the 42 items that are being brought forward on the Policy and Government Oversight Committee report. And so items 1 through 6 are authorizing the sale of city-owned property, the addresses of which are listed in the agenda. Item number 7 is approving the payment of cost judgment in the lawsuit of John Hayden et al. Versus the City of Minneapolis. Items number 8 through 11 are improving the settlement of workers' compensation claims and dismissing appeals of the Public Employees Retirement Association duty disability continuing health care. Items 11, 12, and 13 are resolutions adopting title and ballot language to be submitted to the qualified voters of the City of Minneapolis at the general election on November 3rd, 2020, related to special municipal elections and redistricting of wards and park districts. Item number 14 is a resolution approving the appointment of election judges for the August 11, 2020 state primary, and authorizing Director of Elections to appoint additional election judges as necessary. Item number 15 is the ordinance amending the Summit House Housing Improvement Area Ordinance, extending the effective date to July 25th, 2020. Item number 16 is an extension of exclusive development rights for the development at 628 Franklin Avenue to the Divine Institute. Item number 17, a resolution requesting the transfer of $4 million from the Minneapolis cost of issuance account held by the Minneapolis St. Paul Housing Finance Board to the city. Item number 18 approves master contracts for eligible providers of workforce development services for 2021 through 2025. Item number 19 is acceptance of a COVID-19 block grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Item number 20 is a contract amendment that authorizes an increase to a contract with Deloitte Counseling for benefits, consulting, and actuarial services. Item number 21 is an amendment authorizing an increase to the contract for the fire station number 4 renovations project. Item number 22 accepts proposals from LS Black Constructors to provide materials, labor, equipment, incidentals for construction services for the Minneapolis impound lot. Item number 23 authorizes an RFP for community solar garden subscriptions. Item number 24 is a contract with Innovo Benefits Administration and Marketing for retirement benefit programs administrations. Item number 25 authorizes a partnership agreement with the Loring Greenway Association. Item number for landscaping and maintenance amenities. Item number 26 authorizes an agreement with the Met Council for work completed as a part of the Hennepin Avenue reconstruction project. Item number 27 authorizes cooperative funding agreement with Hennepin County for ADA related improvements on 46th Street South. Item number 28 is an agreement with the Minneapolis Grain Exchange for steam seed service heat at the Hoff parking ramp. Item number 29 is an agreement with West Yost Associates to provide professional services related to the water treatment and distribution services. Items number 30 through 32 are contract amendments with Thomas & Sons for the 8th Street reconstruction project. Item number 33 accepts a gift from Green Minneapolis to revitalize PD Plaza. Item number 34 is several appointments to the special service districts, all of which are listed on the agenda. Item number 35 and 36 is the authorization of submittal of grant applications to the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Items number 37, 38, accepting bids to provide all materials, labor, and equipment for and incidentals necessary for pump station projects. And item number 35 accepts the bid for closed circuit television inspection of the city's stormwater system. Item number 40 revises the Minneapolis homes ownership products to align with the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan. Item number 41 adopts guidelines for city-sponsored perpetual affordable ownership, land trust housing model. And item number 42 is the resolution declaring racism as a public health emergency in the city of Minneapolis. Madam President, I move approval of all 42 items.
Thank you. Council Vice President has moved the POGO agenda. Is there any discussion from council members? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to, there's two items I want to speak to. So first is item 41 around the perpetual affordable housing. There are a few policy questions within that. I am not sure. So this really impacts North Minneapolis in particular. There's a specific policy question around differentiating the applicability of this program, which I think is, I mean, that's okay because that's how equity works. However, I have still not had the opportunity to engage with CPED staff to be able to understand how it will be applied, what the impacts are. We had a great conversation at POGO, but I would like to be able to dig into those details a little bit more before I feel comfortable personally with moving that forward. So I would like to make a motion to delay item number 41 till the next cycle.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. And do you think it makes sense to postpone both item 41 and 40 as well, which is the related item about the Minneapolis Home Program specifically?
Sure, we can go ahead and include both of those if that feels like that makes more sense. So I would adjust my motion to delay items 40 and 41 till the next cycle.
Councilor Cunningham has moved to postpone items 40 and 41. Is there any discussion on that motion? I don't see any. And I know that the housing group within CPED is already shifting this program in relationship to specific race equity goals. So I think some of these bigger policy questions were brought to the council in this proposal that is reflected in items 40 and 41. But also some interim changes have been made to that program in recent years under direction from the council members whose wards have a lot of the property within them. Council Vice President.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And I just wanted to speak to the motion a little bit, which, you know, I mean, certainly this will impact a lot of properties potentially in North Minneapolis. And so consequently, it's important for the council member to be able to get more information. I just hope we don't delay this too long. This project has been designed specifically to address many of the concerns that I know Councilmember Cunningham has been discussing, creating wealth building opportunities for communities of color and home ownership opportunities. So, you know, while I will support this today, I don't want us to drag this out for very long.
All right, thank you both. So I will, is there any other discussion on the POGO agenda or on those two items? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on the whole agenda. So approval on all items except item 40 and 41, which would be postponed for one cycle back to the city council meeting in that cycle.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye,
There are 12 ayes.
that carries, and those items are adopted and postponed as appropriate. That completes the POGO report. So the next order of business is reports from special committees, and we do have a report from the executive committee that will be given by the council vice president. Oh, Council Vice President, you're muted.
Thank you. I thought I had unmuted. So thank you, Madam President. The Executive Committee brings forward one item for consideration today, which is to receive the appointment of Jim Router as City Attorney and refer that appointment to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee for scheduling of a public hearing. I move the Executive Committee report for approval.
Council Vice President has moved the committee report. Is there any discussion? And again, that motion would be to refer the item to POGO in order to set the public hearing that would happen at the next POGO meeting after that. Any discussion? I will note that members of the executive committee did ask a few questions at that meeting before forwarding it to the council, and I know council members have been and will continue to reach out to the nominee to learn more. Seeing no further questions or comments, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye,
There are 12 ayes.
that carries, and that is adopted, will be referred to the POGO committee meeting. The next order of business is the introduction and referral calendar. We have 5 ordinances to consider this morning. I'll read each of the introductions and then open the floor for questions and comments on any of them, and then call for a single vote on all 5. So first, Councilmember Fletcher moves to introduce and give first reading to and refer to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee the subject matter of an ordinance adding a new section to the Information Governance Code addressing funding, acquisition, and deployment of military and surveillance equipment. Second, Councilmember Palmisano gives motion to introduce and give first reading to and refer to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee an ordinance related to the chief's disciplinary decision required under the terms of the stipulated order that was entered into by the city and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. The third and fourth motions are both by Council Members Gordon and Schrader, which are motions to introduce, give first reading to, and refer the subject matter related to ordinances to the Business Inspections and Zoning Committee, which pertain to the general subject of regulations for rooming units and congregate living facilities. These ordinances are aimed at different titles in 12 and 20, which are why they are in different ordinances, and they cover multiple chapters, which are listed in the printed agenda. The fifth and final motion is by Council Members Gordon and Fletcher and is for the introduction, first reading, and referral to the Business Inspections and Zoning Committee, the subject matter of an ordinance amending the zoning code to regulate off-street parking and travel demand management, which involves several chapters, which are all listed in the agenda. Are there any discussion on the 5 motions for ordinance introductions? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have the opportunity to talk to Councilmember Schrader as well as Councilmember Gordon about being an author and working with them collaboratively on items 3 and 4. They both agreed, and so I'm hoping I could be added as an author and also not just in name, but so that I can participate with them. I think this is a really important thing, an issue I've worked on for a long time, and I'm interested in working collaboratively with them on it.
Thank you. I see the clerk confirming that addition. Any further discussion on the introductions? I see Councilmember Gordon. Is that a, okay, got it. So seeing no more discussion, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
I enthusiastically welcoming Councilmember Goodman in the efforts on 2 of those.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Especially aye on 3 and 4 and aye on the remainder.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 enthusiastic ayes.
I'm enthusiastically welcoming the enthusiasm on implementing our comprehensive plan and all of the housing options it laid out. Thank you all for that. So those ordinances will be referred to the next cycle and the committees that are indicated on the agenda. So that completes the business on the public portion of our agenda. We do have a request for a closed session. The purpose is to discuss litigation matters which are listed on the agenda with our city attorney. And I want to read those into the record. Those 3 items. So I just have to find my agenda page. Okay, so there are 3 items. The litigation matter of Karen Nelson Schaefer as trustee for the next of kin of George Floyd versus Derek Chauvin, Thomas Lean, Alexander Kung, and the city of Minneapolis. The litigation matter of Jared Burt versus the city of Minneapolis and John Doe. And the third is the litigation matter of Catholic Mutual Relief Society of America, a suffragette of the Church of Annunciation versus Mastech Inc. and others versus the city of Minneapolis. So those 3 items are listed on the agenda for the closed item. Before I move to close the meeting, I'll call on the city attorney to give us the reasoning for the requested closed session.
Thank you, President Bender. With those 3 cases, they are in active or threatened pending litigation in both state and or federal court. Your lawyers wish to discuss with the council litigation strategy. Accordingly, under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Minnesota Statutes 13D.05, Subdivision 3B, the council may, upon a proper motion, close the meeting for the purposes of attorney-client communication on these matters. In considering the motion, the council should weigh the right of the public to know what its government is doing against the need of the city to preserve the confidentiality of your discussions with your attorneys.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. With that, I'll move that the meeting may be closed pursuant to the Open Meeting Law, Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, Subdivision 3B, to discuss attorney-client communications and 3 litigation matters listed on the agenda, which I previously read, for the reasons that have been explained by the city attorney. Is there a second?
Second.
The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon. Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon,
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and we may now move to the closed session. We'll reconvene in an open session after we have concluded those 3 matters that were listed. So to my colleagues, you'll be able to exit this meeting and re-enter the new meeting in the invitations from the clerks. Thank you all.
Madam President, this is Casey, and we have all council members back in the public session, and I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The time is now 12:25 p.m. and the City Council has reconvened our open public session following the conclusion of our closed session. Let the record reflect that there are no actions being taken as a result of the closed session. With that, we have concluded all of the items on our agenda for today's meeting. With nothing further to come before the council and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. That adjournment will be to an adjourned council meeting on Friday, July 24th at 9:30 a.m. And that will be for the purpose of adopting the adjusted budget for 2020. Thank you, and we will see everyone at our budget committee meeting in just about a half hour at 1 p.m. Thank you.